decided to record this match to dispel a rather common myth, which is that the T34's gun is not accurate. I don't hear it so much these days, but certainly a year or two ago everyone was complaining about this thing's gun. Oh, it's a bad tank, it can't carry, you can't snipe with it, you know, you have to get right up in people's faces and then it's a roll of the dice. It's not true. I think the biggest problem people had is a lot of them were snapshotting, which is, I don't know, better players tend not to do it as much, but pubbies especially snapshot all the time. I mean, if you watch my videos, I do it occasionally, but the average player doesn't even stop to aim their shots most of the time. So I'm running a V-stab, rammer, and gun lane drive on this tank. GLD is just there because the aim time is quite slow, so that boosts it a little and lets me take shots earlier without having to worry about the aim bloom. As you can see, the moving aim bloom is quite bad. If I was to fire on the move, I would probably not hit something even from me to that Pershing away. But that's not the point of the T34. The point of this tank is to go hold down somewhere and just ruin somebody's day. If you want to fire on the move accurately, then you should really get a Carnarvon or a Conqueror, or really any of the higher tier British heavies, or the American T10 35. So you can see the enemy AMX who was complaining about his tank is dead already, taken care of by our T57. There's no arty, so I'm quite happy moving around in this area behind the dunes here. If there was arty, this area would be a bit risky. Certainly in a big, slow target like the T34. This tank actually has very, very, very bad ground resistance stats. I believe they're on par with the IS-70, if not worse. So it has very poor agility, but it's not too bad considering the size and weight of the tank. So here, I wait for the AMX to come up. I know I'm going to get a shot on him. As you can see, I had an APCR shell loaded, just in case that E75 was the first thing over the hill, but it turns out he would rather sit down in the gully there and shoot up at the Object 140 and the T57. So we've got plenty of guys down south, I'm not too worried about that. And we've got enough guys up here pushing north with me. These two enemy tanks are hiding here, so I decided to take advantage of their failure to control the terrain and push in on them and hold down on this area. Panther 2 is not paying attention, and I know he's going to have trouble penning my turret at all, so I can quite happily bully him while he tries to deal with the mediums. So as you can see, the gun bloom is quite bad, even at close range, but if I stop and aim even for a second or two, there's not much chance of missing. You can see it's Panther 2 is shooting APCR at me and still not penning. Bit of a snapshot there, but it's still connected. It is possible to get snapshots that hit in this tank. You just have to know when it's going to work and when it's not. So E75 gets tracked. I was going to go for the side turret, but as he began traversing it towards me, the angle became too much, so I went for the hull instead. And now with these two spotted, I roll up onto the crest of the dune. This isn't a very good hold down position. As you can see, my tank's sort of seesawing on the crest, but I'm fairly confident these two aren't going to open fire on me. They appear to be preoccupied with the tanks right up in their faces, so I'm happy to sit here and shoot from a distance. And once again, with no arty, there's not really anything for me to be afraid of. So my team's established map control. We now own roughly 3/4 of the map, and we have most of the enemy tanks lit. In fact, all bar 2 have been spotted at some point. I roll up and stop on this crest now, waiting for the 54E1 to come out of cover. He looks like he's going to for a moment here, but gets unspotted right as I prepare to shoot him, and he moves back forwards. So I go for the ISU instead, can see I waited for the aim, and there we go, direct hit. Looking for a shot on the T34E1 here, of course he moves. The ISU comes out again, but he's just lurking behind the very corner of that mountain, I think. So I decide to wait for something else to reveal itself. Because of the bad aim bloom, I don't want to move, because I just know they're going to leave cover as I reposition. T-54 appears to be getting rather anxious to move, and sure enough, he does, and I managed to take him out. Now an E50M pops up here, and you can see this is a 590 meter shot. In fact, out to 600 meters when he reverses up. And yet, straight through the side of his tank. Well, either the side of his hull or the flat face of his turret, but it was a hit at 600 meters with a T-34. And in fact, that would have been a hit too, directly in the side, had I led him about another foot or so. That was my own fault that I missed. Now, he's right near the edge of my render distance. 600 meter shots are difficult in any tank, but as you can see, as long as you aren't moving around, driving back and forth like a puppy, and blowing out your aim bloom, the T-34 is quite competent at longer distance shooting. Obviously it bounced there, I must have hit his front plate. And then he turns and gives me broadside as he tries to engage the 140. And straight to the center of mass, directly where the shot was aimed. Now, provided you wait for the aim bloom to settle, in this or in really virtually any tank, all but the most inaccurate guns should be able to hit a tank and possibly even hit its weak spots out to about 500, 600 meters. The biggest concern is leading moving targets and also the trajectory of the shell. Some of the guns with a more pronounced arc can be quite difficult to hit moving targets with at longer distances, or even hit targets with at all, because the shell will have a habit of sailing over the target or arcing in at a bad angle and bouncing off. So that's one thing to keep in mind when shooting at long distance, but insofar as the T-34 goes, there's nothing wrong with this tank. It's quite happily able to pen tier 10s without firing too much gold. The gun has, I believe, 248mm of pen on its AP rounds. Its APCR rounds, I think, are like 280 something. They're not great, but they're okay. Certainly sufficient. Its mobility is not very good, but really the T-29's isn't either. And this tank used to be the Tier 9 US heavy tank before the trees were shuffled around and it was replaced by the M103. So it stands to reason it handles a lot like T-29 does. It essentially is a T-29, just with a much bigger gun. I would certainly recommend it if you're looking for a Tier 8 premium tank that makes decent money and will not cause you to lose all the time. The other Tier 8 premium tanks, the Nova is just, power creep's left it behind. Its armor is irrelevant now. It won't stand up to anything unless you find a very good side scraping position. It has an excellent gun though, and the problem is between its terrible mobility and its rather bad armor, it just can't carry in higher tier games. It struggles even in Tier 8 now with the proliferation of high pen guns. It won't get preferential matchmaking, however, because its gun is too good. Preferential tends to be based around a tank's gun. So, for instance, the BTSV and Panzer IIJ, while they're fairly well protected for their tier, and in the BTSV's case very mobile, they have weak guns, so they get preferential matchmaking. The Ram 2 doesn't get preferential because the 6-pounder is an adequate gun to take on Tier 7s. So, if you're looking for a Tier 8 premium tank, I would recommend probably for advanced players, the FCM 50-ton seems okay. IS-6 is sort of just generally good for everybody. The gun isn't very good, but you can, with liberal use of APCR, it's not too bad, and the armor's very good. The T-34, again, is a tank most people can make work as long as you aim your shots. has very strong turret armor. The hull will occasionally bounce things. The gun is excellent. Probably one of the better guns of all the tier 8s. The T34's I would recommend you stay away from. I was really hopeful for that tank. I was hoping it would be essentially a sort of downscaled Wheezy 120 in that it has a very powerful gun, but you know, its gun handling isn't quite there. However, it turned out to not only have worse mobility and terrible gun handling, among the worst in the game, but because it also has the D25T rather than a more powerful gun, it doesn't have the pen. So really, if you're going to drive a tank with the 175mm pen gun at tier 8, I would go for the 112 or the IS-6 instead. And the IS-6 does get preferential thanks to its gun. Shit, is that the... No, KV5, even though it's not available in the store very often anymore. KV5 is definitely worth getting, but it's one of those tanks you want to fire a lot of gold from. It's not so much a money maker as it is a puppy tiers maker. So honestly, out of all the tier 8 premiums, there are 2 tanks I can suggest in good conscience for making actual credits, if that's what you want to do. One is the T34, because you just don't need to fire gold ammo very often. It has a very solid gun. The other one is the FCM, which has, again, a very solid gun. Not quite as good as the T34's. The problem is the FCM is much better for more advanced players because its armor doesn't hold up very well. It's almost like a giant medium tank rather than a heavy. But those 2 will definitely make you money. You won't need to fire much gold out of them. Whereas a lot of the other premium tanks at tier 8, you tend to need a little bit, or in the case of the KV5 you need to fire a lot, same with the Super Pershing. So it really depends on what you're looking at getting a premium tank for. If you want to, you know, pad out your stats, then the IS-6, KV5, Type 59, even though you can't get it anymore. Any of those with preferential matchmaking, decent armor, and okay guns when firing gold, those are good for it. The KV5 in particular has such a ridiculous hit point pool. The T34 is just a generalist. It's good at everything. It's good at winning games. It's good at making money. The FCM is a good money maker as well. So before you go to buy any premium tank, really, you need to look at what you want it for, and then consider whether you're going to enjoy it, whether you're going to do well in it. Because I mean, let's be honest, there are tanks which your average player won't be able to handle. I would say the FCM is probably one of them. And then there are tanks that, you know, work better for average players than they do for good players. I can't think of any of the premiums offhand that do, but for instance, just from the regular tank lines, I would say the KV-1S is definitely a much better tank for average players because that gun just does so much damage, and all you have to do is get a hit. Whereas other tanks like the Hellcat and 3601 are much, much, much better tanks in the hands of a good player. I hated the KV-1S. I've sold it like 3 times. I'm probably not going to buy it back again, just because the gun is so frustrating to work with, especially when you're used to accurate guns. So in my case, I much prefer the 3601 or Hellcat. And it's the same thing with premium tanks. You need to look at what's going to work well for you.